Good morning, afternoon, Hanok Young. And I don't know, in just the 30 seconds that we've been online prior to hitting the record button, I'm scared because you said you got surprises and that you never quite know how that goes. So how you doing?
I'm doing fine. We've got gorgeous spring weather.
Yeah.
The 100 plus degree temperatures have abated temporarily,
Oh,
which is
good.
because, according to the calendar, it's still only April.
Yeah.
Uh, so we have plenty of time to bake. A lot of updates to cover.
Okay.
But instead of doing the updates first, I thought, since we're all settled in on the bus already, we continue driving north. You
Okay.
know, new bus, magic bus. Yeah, that's us.
Or you could start your one of your favorite or famous for songs of the wheels on the coach go round and round. But that's an
Yeah,
update that we really can't put online. That's something that you only get the backstory on that when you're on the actual tour, not the virtual tour. So,
that's true.
all right.
Sorry, boys and girls.
Yeah. Well, somewhere along the way, there is a Glida stop, which is
Always.
also a Shore team stop along the way. And for those that don't know what Glida is, well, it's ice cream. If you don't know what Shore team is, I'm about to say Shore team. If you don't know what Shore team is, well, it's something that you need to do when you're on the bus about every hour and a half. So I'll just leave it at that. So that's your Hebrew. That's everyone's Hebrew lesson for the day. Take it away there, tour guide.
Okay. Well, today, as promised, we are reaching dun 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 dun. What is, for just about every group that I've ever brought to Israel, one of the highlights is going to the Kinneret, the Sea of Galilee. Now, just and I can't help but giggling. Very often I get the, why do you guys in Israel call it the Kinneret? I mean, it's the Sea of Galilee. And that
Yeah.
reminds me, it was on one of our Connect tours a number of years ago. We were passing the campus of Hebrew University in Jerusalem, and the sign pointed to the Mount Scopus campus. Now, the sign was in English, Mount Scopus campus this way. There was also a sign in Hebrew pointing in the same direction. So the guy said to me, he said, how come you guys don't have a Hebrew term for Mount Scopus? I said, you mean Harat Sofim? He said, well, it doesn't say that. I said, yeah, you're reading the English sign. Okay.
Well,
So,
you go to Israel, Hanok, and you have these things in your mind. I mean, I remember uh, coming out of Nazareth on the bus, and this is a different way than how we're going in today. But
right.
we came over the hilltop, and here I am pastoring this Southern Baptist Charismatic Pentecostal church that has very slight messianic Zionist
Zion,
leaning at the moment.
Zionist lean.
Yeah.
Yes.
But it's going to be heading more toward that direction. And I mean, I didn't know what the word Torah was. I did not. I'd never heard. Me in Hebrew. I mean, I just learned Boker Tov. Good morning. And I looked out and saw the Sea of Galilee, and I thought, that's not really a sea, because that's what you got in your mind. That's what you're taught from Sunday school class, and it's like that's not really a sea. That's like a lake, and where I come from, it's not a real big one. And but that was the first moment that I started. I found all of a sudden I noticed that I had tears on my cheeks. Uh, I was crying like a baby, and it was like, what in the world's happening here? And it was at that moment in time that the land of Israel just reached up and grabbed me. So the Kinneret is a very, very special place for me, just looking at it. So go ahead.
Okay, well, first of all, before I, give a quick description of, the length, the depth, blah, 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 one of the things that I find incredibly impactful is when we take the group up to Mount Arbel, the Arbel Cliffs, and you hold your arms out in a V. Could you do that for us, as you'd like to do? Okay, like that. And you always say, between your hands was the majority of Yeshua's ministry.
Yeah, because right here you would have Magdala, and then
Yes,
here would be the other side, and would be the land of the Gadarenes. And so, I mean, literally, it would be kind of like more like this.
exactly. Exactly. And that single illustration, I see people's heads beginning to explode.
Mm-hmm.
And when we actually take them, okay, for those of you who haven't as of yet experienced the Connect to Israel experience, because it's not just a tour, it's an experience, boys and girls. The boat ride on the Kinneret is something that touches people's hearts deeply. But let's talk about the Kinneret for a second. It's 13 miles long. It's 8 miles wide. And yes, we call it a sea, but it ain't no sea. It's a big old lake. Now, it's fresh water. That's water that's filling not only from rain above it, but the snow melting on Mount Hermon. The average depth is 84 feet. At its deepest point, it's 141 feet. No, we do not go swimming there. And no, we don't go to the deepest part. Very interestingly enough, it is the lowest freshwater lake in the entire world. And it is the second lowest lake of any kind in the world. All right, boys and girls, do you want to guess where the first one was? We were there a few weeks ago. The Dead Sea. That's right. Boom. Drop the microphone on that one. So the Kinneret, which for those of you like Mike and I who've been to Israel many times, I've been there a lot actually, over the years, remembers how sad the Kinneret looked because of the drought. And now the water is right up to the tippy top. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And
the first time I was there, it was full. And then, I went back and it was still full. But during the Oslo War back in, the 2000s, early 2000s,
yeah,
drop in the red line. And those that had gone to like the Galilee experience when it was open years ago,
yeah,
the docks right there, those canals were totally dry. There wasn't a drop of water anywhere to be found in there. To go for a boat ride, you had to walk. I mean, they literally were building docks out there, and eventually, the boat ride was kind of nothing.
yeah. But now the boat ride is very exciting. It's with our friend Daniel Carmel, who does, worship and singing and all that stuff. For those listening who like to sing and like to do, the Israeli folk dance, which y'all love to call Davidic dance, that's okay. Call it whatever you'd like, just don't call me late for dinner. It's not mandatory.
Are you trying to tell me that David didn't know how to do the hora?
David probably went out and said, let's do some folk dancing. But that's okay. As someone pointed out to me, someone asked me the other day, well, they asked me a question, seriously, sent me an email asking me about things that King David did or didn't do. And I kind of got the impression that this guy actually felt like King David and I went to high school together. So it's kind of like, I'm old, buddy, but I'm not that old.
Not quite that old. Okay. You did. I don't think you mentioned that the Kinneret is about 700. You mentioned it's the lowest freshwater lake, but it's about 700 feet below sea level,
Yeah.
which means it's sitting in a bowl. And one of the things about the Kinneret that was interesting to me on the first trip that I went is you're reading in the Besoret, the Gospels, about
Yeah.
how the winds came up there, and it's like, okay, how could winds come up here in a way that would scare fishermen that had lived there on that lake all their lives,
Yeah.
until you're there when the winds come up one time.
Yeah.
And you find that the wind is blowing from all directions at the same time. And so
Yeah.
whitecaps are just, pretty much crashing into one another because the wind just starts to swirl in that bowl. And it is
Yeah.
not that, when in the Besoret, it says that Yeshua looked out and saw. And of course, in my before going there, I'm thinking, wow, this is something, supernatural vision into something, because I'm used to, winds associated with a thunderstorm, associated with
Yeah.
clouds and all this kind of stuff. It can be a totally clear day. And so
It doesn't matter.
you could literally be sitting there with all that wind and see with the natural eyes these men
Yeah.
struggling out there.
It's really amazing. And that bowl effect that you're describing, it can get at times, like when you put in one of those mix masters in the middle,
Yeah.
it can get pretty messy.
Yeah. It's kind of like being in a blender. We have what's called the evangelical triangle that, we can spend a lot of weeks here in this area. We have the Peace Outlook. We have, of course, Gamla, which we'll probably dedicate a whole program to.
At least.
Yeah, at least one. Let's talk a little bit about Tiberius, Tiberia.
Okay.
This is the largest of the cities around the Kinneret. It's not mentioned in the Besoret in the Gospels, but the chances of the disciples of Yeshua not being involved with that town at all. What's your thoughts?
In all likelihood, I can't point to you specific spots on the ground where they would have walked, but they were for sure in that area. There's no doubt about it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing that's really amazing. When people come there are all these evangelical tours to walk in the footsteps of Jesus. And, one of the places, and I mentioned this when I used to guide in the Western Wall tunnels all those 700 times. If you're looking for a spot where Yeshua would have walked, that in and of itself, that area around the temple certainly would have been one. If you were looking for an area that Yeshua hung out in, that would be the Galilee, the Kinneret, for sure. No doubt about it.
Yeah, probably, in that day, probably you had to go to Tiberius to go to Walmart. There wouldn't have been one in a small town like
No, we don't have one in all of Israel.
Yeah, I know you still don't have one. So Tiberia is actually very famous, not in the Besoret, but more in line with what happened after the destruction of the temple.
Yeah.
Some thoughts of what happened in that time frame.
Okay, well, that actually the timing of this, we didn't plan in advance that we were going to be doing that area today. But tomorrow night, is Lag BaOmer. It is, again, now for those of our Hebrew roots friends whose heads are about to explode whenever we mention a holiday, it is not a holiday as in Chag, as in Yom Tov, as in a feast day, but it is a day celebrating a lot of things. According to tradition, there were thousands of students of Rabbi Akiva that died of a plague during the Bar Kokhba rebellion. Shimon Bar Yochai, one of the Tannaitic sages, was in that area, Mount Meron, not all that far away. And there are celebrations tomorrow night, including two of the most interesting customs. One is the lighting of bonfires. And this is, really kind of interesting in the sense that it's symbolic of the light of the Torah that Rav Shimon Bar Yochai taught. I'm not a big pyromaniac. I'm really not. I'm kind of afraid of fire. So it's not something that I participate in, but young Jewish boys tend to play with bows and arrows. And when you see Haredi, ultra-Orthodox kids running around with bows and arrows, now, if they play their cards right, when they grow up, we can actually put them in the IDF. But no, they want to. So but in other words, part of the mission in my mind of the Israel update is for me to, kind of give people, like, if we were walking in the streets over the next 2 days, what would we see? Mm-hmm. So you've got teenagers here in Modi'in that are running around ripping off supermarkets for wooden pallets, which they then rip apart and they set these bonfires. Now, of course, the city authorities try to limit the area for safety's sake of where these bonfires are set. Now, these are kids who are totally secular, remember, here in Modi'in. Well, the thing that's funny is the very next day, you walk down those areas and it's like the day after a major battle, smoldering ruins. It's bizarre. It's bizarre. But the Galilee became the center of Jewish life after Rome decimated Jerusalem and the surrounding environment. There's a common misconception that after the temple was destroyed, the Jewish people were sent off into exile. That's not true. Not true at all. And the way I can prove it to you, like hands down, is 62 years later, the temple was destroyed in the year 70. Bar Kokhba rebellion started in 132. That was a much bigger revolt than the one that resulted in the second temple being destroyed. Mm-hmm. So.
Good.
Oh, okay. So yeah, the Galilee became the center of Jewish life. It was not the only place where, because Jewish life continued later on in and around Jerusalem, but in the hills around Hebron, Susia, for instance, as well as in the Golan. And that's why we go and we find the ruins of synagogues from the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th centuries.
What's interesting to me about the area of Tiberius is that this is a people who are there trying to figure out now, how do we live out this Torah without the temple? This is a generation that had never thought about this concept. They'd had the temple, and now
no one ever did.
Yeah, now it's destroyed. So how do we live out the Torah without the ability to walk out many of the commandments in Leviticus regarding sacrifices, the priesthood? This is all, everything is changing in so many ways, and we have the pretty famous document called the Talmud that comes out of this time period, correct?
Well, it's actually a little later, but what it is with the Roman destruction of the Second Temple, with the decimation of the population after the Bar Kokhba rebellion, with the advent of Christianity and it becoming Rome's state religion, the oppression on Jews in the land of Israel by the 3rd to 4th century was extreme. All of the oral traditions and teachings, which became the Mishnah, the oral law is the Mishnah. When people refer to the Talmud as the oral law, that's not correct. The Talmud is a combination of the Mishnah, of the oral law, the teachings of all these rabbis. And by the way, when oral transmission of teachings, you find that in Yeshua's teachings.
Mm-hmm.
His contemporaries all taught the same way. I mean, it's without a doubt.
And
so you have, I'm sorry.
The Talmud.
So
we're go ahead with yours, then I'll jump in here.
Okay. So the Gemara, in English usually pronounced the Gemara, is the commentary and the discussions on the Mishnah and a whole variety of other things, but it doesn't read as systematic minutes of a business meeting. It's largely in Aramaic, not Arabic, Aramaic, and it's not easy to read in translation. And then you have the Agadah, all these various stories. This rabbi talks about this one gives health advice, this one talks about geography, this one it's a whole variety of things. That's the Talmud.
These documents, the Talmud, the Mishnah, all of these, there are people out there that have, almost put these as satanic. I mean, I've heard crazy things being said in it. To me, I mean, there's a lot of things that I've read in these documents that I kind of shake my head at. I think pretty much anybody would. It's like, how did you get to that? But where the whole aspect of this changed for me, especially with the Talmud, is beginning to understand the time period that these people were in.
Right.
And the transitional time of, again, how do we walk this out without the temple? How do we walk this out in the midst of Roman occupation? Constantinian Christianity is,
right
there on the verge. We see such interesting figures as Marcion in that day, who was the first Gentile to lead the group of followers of Yeshua, and very anti-Semitic. But on one of our tours before I met you, Miriam Feinberg, who mutual friend and wonderful tour guide in her own right, one night we were in Tiberias, and she said, we're going to do a little bit of a little homework tonight. We're going to have a little game. And she had a piece of paper that had a statement on it out of the Torah. So an instruction, I can't remember what the instruction was. And it had one instruction there, and then had various blocks, open blocks underneath. And so what we did is we broke up into about 5 different tables. And the first everybody got the same piece of paper, but everyone got the one with it would just have the instruction on there. And what we did is the first table to get, you sit down, you look at the instruction, and then you write a commentary about it, about just a couple of sentences about how do we walk out this commandment. Well,
Right.
once you're done with that, then that piece of paper goes to the next table. And the piece of paper from this table over here comes to your table.
Right.
And now you have to give a commentary and expound on
Their
what that table.
commentary. Exactly. And the thing that people who are relatively new to the Torah, and when I say relatively new, 3 decades of Torah observance, quote unquote, in the Hebrew roots movement is like this tremendous like mark of distinction. It's like, whoa, compare that to a couple of thousand years. Sorry, boys and girls,
Yeah.
It pales in comparison.
Yeah.
The hardest thing for them to realize is the Torah for us, the Jewish people, has always included the oral traditions. And we have never been sola scriptura. We have never been only following the text of the 5 books of Moshe, including Yeshua. Yeshua was never sola scriptura, and it's evident in all of his teachings. So for us, the Torah is a living, breathing thing. Here it is, without the temple, what do? Whereas people in the Hebrew roots movement often just look at their text. And by the way, it's not even typically an authentic translation. They're using the quote unquote complete Jewish Bible, which is neither Jewish nor complete. And they're then saying, like, for instance, like I love people asking, so what's this with the wave offering? They think it's like being at a stadium, where you go around and everyone does the wave. Come on.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So, and I'm sure, this kind of, some people may disagree along with the oral traditions, but the truth is that we all live by some types of oral traditions. We all
everybody does. Everybody does.
How do you guard the Shabbat? Well, we come up with our own ways of guarding the Shabbat, which is called halakha. How do we walk this out? And so, understanding that this is not some kind of a demonic plot, but this is a group of people that were trying to figure out how to walk it out. Did they get everything right? Probably not. Do we get everything right today? Probably not. Well, I could say definitely not. But it's about our desire to walk it out. So the area of Tiberius is fascinating. It is fascinating. We'll talk more about this. So before we run totally out of time, give us some updates. What's going on? Then you have a special surprise. You're sending everyone who emails you a check for $1,000. Is that right?
Well, it's interesting. Someone wrote me just the other day and said, so you haven't been working for 14 months. The government's not giving you unemployment insurance. How are you doing it? Now, what's really funny is they didn't say, like, can I help you, brother, at all? But, anyway, neither here nor there. What's going on with the government? Well, next week, the beginning of May, I think it's either the 4th or the 5th, Netanyahu's shot at forming a government will be over. He is totally out of control. He tried to appoint a justice minister yesterday, and it's illegal. Our attorney general in high court had to slap him down. The guy he offered Benny Gantz, if he joined the government, a rotation as prime minister. Now understand, the reason we had the last election, the reason we just had the last election is because he didn't honor his agreement with Benny Gantz to be prime minister. He offered it to Aryeh Deri of the Shas party. Deri in the 90s served 22 months in prison for bribery. He is about to be indicted, which I guess Netanyahu figures, well, and Netanyahu wants these guys to rotate as prime minister, but he's going to stay in the prime minister's residence. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. It's insane. One point I really wanted to make, don't listen to this nonsense of we need a right-wing government. We need a left-wing government. We don't need a right-wing or left-wing government. We don't need no stinking government. What we need is a government that cares for Israel. Every party, except for the Islamists and our, Communist Party, really believes the same about the security of Israel. We need a government that will work for our people. It's no surprise. Netanyahu was supposedly right-wing. He had the chance. An American administration supported the declaration of Jewish sovereignty in part of Judea and Samaria. Nothing ever happened.
Yeah.
So that's that. Tourism, potentially some good news. On May the 23rd, Israel is beginning to open up gradually for tour groups. Now, Israel will be doing the exact same thing that the European Union is doing. It's not just Israel. The EU is doing the same thing, meaning that people would need to have a COVID test before leaving their home country. They would need to be either vaccinated or recovered from COVID, and then they would be tested for antibodies upon arrival. As of July the 1st, if the numbers stay low, that will then be extended to individual tourists. I believe over time, you've got to give it time. You've got to give the situation in the world a chance to open up, that these requirements will be changed. People are losing their minds saying, I'm never going to Israel again. Yeah, just chill out, buddy. It's a process. I mean, look what's going on in India, France, Brazil. I mean, there's a lot of illness in the world.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll see. I am still guardedly optimistic that we will indeed be able to have our Connect to Israel tour at the end of October. I am neither a prophet nor a donkey, and I can't. We just have to have faith and keep moving. I do want to thank those who have reached out and contributed over time. It's very, very appreciated. Now, are we just about out of time?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. Now's the time to say goodbye to all our company. MIC, see you real soon. KEY, why? Because we love you. MOOSE, Mickey Mouse. Now, of course, I have to do my own version of it. You have to understand that. One day I will get you to cry on air, Mike. One day soon. By the way, dun, 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 looking into the possibility of coming to America by the end of the summer. Dun, 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 dun. We'll see. Hoping, praying.
Your Mickey Mouse probably affected your invitation to Franklin, North Carolina, though.
Oh, no. Well, excuse me, I have to get off the air because I have to message Kathy because, I know from whence my invitations come.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I do know a couple of your smaller supporters that the little short people that would probably enjoy your Mickey Mouse. So,
well,
you
I
heard
hope
it
so.
here first from Moda'in.
Yes.
Young singing Mickey Mouse. What do you do with that?
I don't know, other than saying goodbye and blowing kisses to everybody.
See you.
Take care, Mike. Regards. Bye-bye.
Later.